Artificial intelligence from the contact reports.
Contact Report 215. If the Third World War will actually happen, as calculations and observations appear to indicate to be probable now, and also during the approaching few decades. Then, as now, the civilian population will above all have to bear the brunt of the enormous suffering in tremendous numbers in this entire catastrophe, and, last but not least, the fault of the irresponsible scientists, who by cloning will create human machines for military purposes, devoid of conscience and feelings, and will create immensely deadly and all-annihilating computer-like weapons. At the same time, the danger could become reality that the human combat machines, the military clones, will gain their independence and under their own management will bring death, devastation, destruction, and annihilation to the human beings of the Earth and to the planet. Even when the North American continent will be stricken by the most terrible catastrophe which has ever been recorded. Evil military powers will wreak havoc with computerized and nuclear, biological and chemical weapons, whereby it will also happen that computerized weapons become independent and cannot be controlled any longer by human beings. Contact Report 251.
The artificial sun in the sky heralds practically a new era, that of space conquest on a grand scale. Space travel will finally become commercial and an extremely important and powerful institution, by which also the secret of the creation and thus also the origin of life and all existence will be pursued. Just by science, by which this again becomes very powerful, of course in connection with the space institution, by which the scientists are controlled. This cannot go well then. Of course, as it will come to pass, as it must inevitably happen, that the governments of the Earth will be more and more ignored and disadvantaged by the space facility and the scientists, which will once again give rise to disputes, provide the best conditions for a new war. Only about 15 years after the aging gene has been isolated and neutralized, and thus the biological aging of humans can be defeated to a great extent, whereby the earlier malignant genetic manipulation in this respect by the creator rulers will finally be eliminated again. The renewed threat of war will break out and last for about 40 years. But first, about 6 years earlier, humans will be reconstructed into machines or robots by connecting their nerve tracts with the finest electronic biological apparatuses and machines, and thereby controlling them, which will lead to great problems about 85 years later, when, as in the earliest times before, the powerful scientists will begin to play God and create new genetic breeds between humans and animals, who will then declare their solidarity with the robot humans as half-humans. Until then, however, more than 8 decades will pass after the creation of robot humans, as has already been said. With the creation of robotic humans, intelligent robots of a biological, electronic, mechanical kind will also be constructed, as will a very large space station, which will have its own orbit around the sun and on which many humans will live. And again, a war follows on the Earth because the Earth humans still will not have become more peaceful and not cleverer. Also, with regard to scientists, nothing can be predicted in this respect that would be good, because at this time they will carry out the first human-animal genetic manipulations and create beings that will develop as so-called half-humans from human-pig crossbreeding, which will then be trained as fighting machines in order to wage wars and carry out all kinds of work in space. In the long run, however, this will not go well, because they will begin to oppose their creators as well as the robot humans, whose arms and legs will be amputated in order to be able to connect the nerve tracts with fine electronic biological apparatuses, whereby these humans will become living control organs for spaceships and weapons of all kinds, as well as for machines and all kinds of Earth vehicles, etc. At this time, a new man with the universal teaching will appear to submit it to all humankind on the earth, which he will do remarkably well, even if counteractions will be carried out by the existing religions and sects all over the world, as has been customary with them since time immemorial. The teaching of the Spirit will be contained in the teaching, and about 40 years later the teaching of reincarnation will be spread worldwide and will also be recognized by the existing religions. Before this, however, there will be unpleasant encounters with extraterrestrials, which can result in a pleasant connection if the Earth humans take the right path. Otherwise, the unpleasant and, under certain circumstances, also dangerous perspective remains. At this time, humanity also learns to slowly prevent natural disasters through technical intervention. Especially active volcanoes can be calmed and their activity can be contained, as well as weather influences can be brought under control. At the same time, however, warlike actions come into play again on the Earth, which are triggered by the invention or discovery of a new and very valuable energy, whereby their ownership rights will be at stake. Problems also arise with the humans themselves, because their relative immortality, respectively, their longevity will already amount to about 250–350 years at that time, which of course creates more and more overpopulation problems and all other problems resulting from it, to which also migrations of peoples belong, from which also new mixed peoples develop, like for example one that will call itself Eurasian and claim the Eurasian space as its home, at that time when the half-humans, the human-animal gene-manipulated ones, and the robot humans will cause enormous problems, which will lead to a nasty decline of all space programs and almost bring them to a standstill, because the robot humans and half-humans will refuse to continue to work for the normal humans and live a miserable existence of inferiority and exploitation as living controls for spaceships, vehicles and machines, and as fighting machines and so on, etc. This, in turn, will happen at the time when a climatic collapse will take place on the Earth, when the Sun will become noticeably weaker in its function because its nuclear fusions will diminish. The exploratory urge of the Earth humans knows no borders. Consequently, they penetrate further and further into the world's space, which, unfortunately, however, will also bring about disadvantageous effects. So it cannot be avoided that unexpected horrors will appear, because Providence says that at this no longer very distant time the Earth human will encounter something very horrible on their space expeditions, which then brings with it great and difficult problems. An event that is to take place about 20 years later, when the frightening and certain realization is gained that the Sun is indeed a dying star. And again about 35 years later, a new horror will hit the Earth humans, when by a space research ship of Earthlings from a distant planet, a deadly epidemic is introduced on the Earth, which medical science will face helplessly. At this time, the knowledge about the meaning of the creation will be known for about 35 years, as well as the truth that negative and positive in themselves form an independent unity, as well as they are a perfect unity when put together. Only shortly after this realization, the aforementioned space research ship will be launched, which will meet with great horror. Equipped with a completely new propulsion, the ship is to penetrate expedition-wise so far into space that the original home planets of the first gene-manipulated ones are to be reached. A company which at this point is still completely irresponsible for the Earth human, because on the one hand, they are still trapped in their genetic degeneration, and on the other hand, in their megalomania, they dangerously underestimate the dangers of the world space and foreign worlds, which proves itself only about halfway to the original home and origin planets of the genetically manipulated ones when the expedition encounters terrible extraterrestrial life. This world space expedition becomes possible only because at this time the technical equipment and machines and all electronic instruments, etc., no longer have to be operated and controlled by humans, but are equipped with an independent biological intelligence, which makes every control and operation almost infallible. One day, however, robot humans will rebel against this, and they will still be performing their functions at that time. At this time, Earth-human space travel reaches the peak of its development for the time being, although research does not stand still, through which further mysteries of matter are soon fathomed and solved. The emerging domination of the robot humans under the leadership of one of their peers, who as an enemy of all other human life forms will make a name for himself, but will soon be caught up in death, is also in flux. At this time, the megalomaniac scientists once again stage a tremendous spectacle by creating a gigantic second sun. Although it will only be a small group of scientists, they will ignite a Sol planet through a dangerous experiment which will burn for 7 days and glisten as a second sun in the Sol system before it extinguishes and becomes dark. Both Jupiter and Saturn, which are two unfinished small suns, are suitable for such an experiment. Thus, the question of which planets will be chosen for this madness, which will take place in the future, should become superfluous. At the same time, brain research will also make great progress and implant micromodules in the human and animal scalp, through which all control functions of the brain can be taken over and executed. So this will also be the time when an artificial world will be settled in a foreign solar system very far away from the Earth by a big wave of emigration, because the still increasing overpopulation of the Earth planet still rises unreasonably. At the same time, the robot humans become a dangerous problem for the normal humans, because now also these begin to multiply and bear many descendants, who, genetically manipulated, are born without arms and legs, but already with exposed nerve endings so that they can be connected to the apparatuses and machines, etc., without operative interventions. Robot humans will become a real danger for normal people, because they will have undreamt of powers of consciousness, which they will develop in the course of time and as a result of the supernormal use of consciousness, whereby the brain will be supplied to its function from outside with special energies through a very specially devised energy generator, whereby the powers of consciousness can be brought to maximum performance. There comes a time when, with the weakening of the sun's nuclear fusions, enormous changes will take place in the Sol system. Not only will the entire gravitational field be out of control and change, but large-scale climate change will also be the order of the day. This spurs scientists on to peak performance, because they want to counteract the negative effects of the sun, which in contrast to erroneous scientific assumptions will appear much earlier over many millennia than previously assumed up till now. Only now is it really recognized correctly that the sun is a dying star, and thus the collapse of the Sol system is already determined. Even if the sun will continue to exist still approximately 4.1,4,100,000 years, however then already as dead star, which is swallowed then after this time by a black hole and is destroyed. So the scientists begin to perform at their best, and find the miscalculations underlying the pi number. By correcting and now correctly calculating the pi number, the scientists and the incredibly sophisticated technology will be able to harness unimaginable energies for the Earth, by making it possible for them to derive energies from black holes in the wide area of the Milky Way and make them usable for the Earth. At this time, however, scientists will still not be able to reach the center of our galaxy to tap into the black hole there. However, this will not be necessary for the time being because the surrounding objects for energy generation are completely sufficient to serve the Earth. This new energy production, as well as the kind of the energy itself, will henceforth make it possible for the Earth human to develop new space travel forms, in whose consequence and extension also that travel and transport factor becomes reality, which in the year 1995 and all time before, as well as still for a long time into the future, is called fantasy and impossible, namely, time travel. This invention, in turn, enables humanity to travel into the past and the future, as well as into the vastness of the universe, which was previously impossible. As a result, it is of course inevitable that new forms of human life will be discovered. Extraterrestrials from whom Earth people will learn a great deal and unimagined things, and who are immensely more intelligent than the Earth humans themselves. This in turn leads to rapid development in all areas, whereby biological intelligences of artificial form are created, which are used for the control and handling of all apparatuses, devices, electronics and machines, as well as flight and driving, etc., in a form in which it need not be feared that the biological intelligences would become independent and pose a danger to the terrestrial humans, as will be the case with the robot humans who, as a result, will no longer be needed, and will therefore, in short, be exterminated.
Contact Report 279.
You also work in the form of the ultra-subatomic technologies as well as in the neural technologies, etc., whereby you also create artificial intelligences, which further develop themselves and create their own intelligence, and thus can also be creative. Is there not a danger that such intelligences can get out of control, as is always the case in science fiction novels, for example?
No, this danger does not exist. Because our technologies are so aligned that an artificial intelligence eliminates itself if it falls into any of the degenerations and violations of laws that we have established. The security of self-elimination is in the range of 100%. In addition, everything is formed in such a manner that degenerations and violations of the law are impossible from the ground up, so that self-elimination of artificial intelligence is only a final safeguard for all cases.
Contact Report 690.
Now that you say it, I half remember it, but it had really slipped my mind, but which I must now tell Bernadette and put right. But then something else. Recently we were talking in our kitchen about coding certain articles. The books and various writings, and the language came up about how exhausting this work is, and how much time has to be calculated for an hour of coding work. At one point Quetzal calculated this, but I do not remember what the result was.
According to Quetzal's calculations, you may calculate 1 hour of coding work with 28 hours of highest concentration work. So if you do 1 hour of uninterrupted coding activity, that is equivalent to 28 hours of normal cognitive energy expenditure. This says that if you do 1 hour of coding work, you are doing an information processing power expenditure of 28 hours of normal cognitive work.
Cognition, that is, what is meant by thinking in a comprehensive sense.
Cognitive abilities include attention, reasoning, memory, imagination, fantasy, and pictorial vividness. It also refers to the mental ability to develop images in consciousness, to remember them and to be able to perceive them vividly with the inner senses. Further, it also includes creativity, learning, orientation, planning, and problem solving, will, perception, knowledge, and some more.
And cognition also includes emotions, which play an important part in it.
That is, of course, correct.
Cognitive abilities are important elements of research here on Earth, and are studied by various sciences, such as biology, neuroscience, psychiatry, and psychology, as well as by philosophy, and in relation to artificial intelligence. The whole scientific study of cognition, as far as I know, is summarized as cognitive science.
That may be so, yes.
Contact Report 701.
But what I do have to mention is Marianne's article, which I of course read and found to be good, and which you can insert here when you retrieve it during our conversation.
An algorithm in the body, curse or blessing.
For some time now, the NZZ has been publishing more and more extremely informative, instructive, well-written, and also amusing guest commentaries on the broad topic of artificial intelligence, or AI for short, usually adorned with an appropriate cartoon. Basically, AI artificial intelligence is about creating something that is infallible, so to speak, in contrast to inadequate human beings with their various weaknesses. Let's just think of the lack of concentration and endurance, the slowness in thinking, the imprecision in the execution of work, the forgetfulness, the listlessness, the insufficiency, the need for sleep, the required food, the self-will, etc., etc. The fact that for the time being, and also far into the future, it is still the inadequate human being who creates the programs is ignored by the AI enthusiasts, that is to say the nerds or digitalists, Klingler. Their longing is the fusion of human beings and machines. The RFID chipped among them have already made a start. The term algorithm belongs to AI, but what is an algorithm anyway? On the internet, you can find, among other things, a casual one-sentence explanation. An algorithm is a set of instructions, a recipe, etc., for solving a particular problem. First and foremost, it is about the efficiency of a constantly repeating process. This used to be called program modules, which it actually is, but nowadays everything is more mathematically sophisticated than in the days of sequential batch or batch processing for commercial purposes. The more elegant the programming language, the more complex the compiler, translator. Anyone who wants to create algorithms must therefore understand a great deal about mathematics, computer science, and, of course, neurology, because it is primarily a matter of mathematical formulas that are ultimately introduced into the brain or otherwise into the body and are supposed to do their work there. Examples of algorithms are GPS calculations, computer opponents in chess-e. G. Deep Blue by IBM, Google Search, Google Maps, data mining, intelligent smart, applications, traffic lights, predictive forensics, weapons control drones, missiles, etc., etc., etc. There are many forms and types of algorithms, all of which also have a name. If you want to know more about them, take a look at the Google & Co. treasure trove, whose search mechanism is also controlled by a secret algorithm. Each author of the guest articles mentioned illuminates a different side of artificial intelligence. Wolfram Klingler, for example, sees a parallel between the digitalists and the fanatics of other religions. And Peter Glaser, a publicist in Berlin, is concerned with the transformation of utopia into weapons technology, the machine as the measure of all things. That this is by no means a utopia or a fantasy is proven by the prediction of Billy Edward Albert Meier. Billy Edward Albert Meier Contact 251 from 3rd of February 1995. Sentences 269, 271 UFO. Buch Prophetien und Voraussagen, Wasser Mannzeit Verlag, Go.
The new threatening war will break out and last about 40 years, whereby, however, first of all, about 6 years before, human beings will be reconstructed into machines or robots. This will lead to great problems about 85 years later, when, as in the earliest times before, the scientists who have become powerful begin to play God and create new genetic breeds between human beings and animals, who then declare their solidarity with the robot people as half humans. Until then, however, more than 8 decades will pass after the robot-human creation, as has already been said. With the creation of the robot humans, intelligent robots of a biological electronic machine kind will also be constructed, as well as a very large space station which will have its own orbit around the Sun and on which very many human beings will live.
Eduard Kaiser, a physicist with a doctorate in philosophy, teacher, freelance publicist, and jazz musician, explains the algorithmic problem-solving process in a humorous way in his article entitled Der Hang zu neoprimitivem Technoanimismus. Beherrschen uns Algorithmen wirklich? The tendency to neo-primitive techno-animism. Do algorithms really control us? Using 100 disordered socks in a tumble dryer as an example. But he also warns of the dangers of believing in algorithms, around which a hype is made that is not understood by most human beings. The article, which can be found on the NZZ website, is definitely worth reading. Just like all the others. A small section of it clearly shows what must be understood by artificial intelligence for the time being, in order to avoid tipping over into a devotional attitude towards them, the algorithms.
Like all metaphors, the metaphor of the algorithm is also a caricature. Algorithms are ubiquitous, but not everything. Consider Google Maps. Of course, this is a mapping service software, but Google Maps is a physical virtual conglomerate. It involves geographic information systems, satellites and transponders, sensors on cars and rooftops, smartphones, routing systems for data networks, not to mention a small army of human operators at screens who keep the maps up to date worldwide.
Wolfram Klingler, an entrepreneur in the finance and fintech sector and a publicist, is far more dangerous. He calls digitalism a religion and the machine a god, whose followers behave just as fanatically as other religious fundamentalists. A small excerpt. When God tests believers through misfortune, fanatics of all religions believe, the solution lies in strengthening faith. Accordingly, for digitalists, problems created by digitalism are easy to solve, through more of the same. More computers, fewer disruptive human beings. A world on autopilot. 200 years after Kant, human beings should finally stop using their underdeveloped minds. Then nothing will stand in the way of the future. A comparison with religions is of course also made by Eduard Kaiser when he speaks of devotional attitudes. What escapes all the fanatical followers of digitalization is the ulterior and wicked intention of the dark men and women. Just like the religious bigwigs, with whom they are probably also mostly connected, they are also out to surreptitiously influence Earth humans, to incapacitate them and manipulate them in their own interests. No means is too unsavory for them. Ta explained the following to Billy on the 1st of January 2011, on the occasion of the 5/12 official contact.
As you wish, but it could be dangerous for you in some ways.
I accept that.
Then I can speak openly. Zafanat Paniak explained again that on Earth, a religious sectarian organization is working with a certain secret service to manipulate human beings to their liking via television, computers, and the Internet. Not only are the television sets and many monitors manipulated in such a way that the organization can see through them directly into the room and observe and listen in on everything in which the respective set is located, but the computers are also manipulated at will. That alone in relation to the computers means that they can be controlled and interfered with from outside if the organization in question feels like it. But the whole thing goes even further. because the said Secret Service religious sectarian organization also intervenes in and manipulates the lives of all users of television, monitors, and internet devices. This organization, which is protected by every trick in the book by the secret services, has gained entry into the consciousness of human beings throughout the world through the countless manipulated devices and controls their behavior in many areas. See FIGU Special Bulletin Number 60, April 2011.
In seemingly still free, so-called democratic countries, uninitiated followers, that is to say digitalists, allow themselves to be seduced by sophisticated religion and cult-like practices as experimental objects and thereby fulfill for the dictatorial elites the preliminary stage to the goal of total surveillance and dehumanization of the troublesome foot people. Usually this promises a reward system, or at least a simplification of life for system-compliant citizens who switch off their own thinking apparatus and shout pro and hurrah for the rulers. Refusers are not only out of place, but must also be punished in some way. This is how it is planned in China, where citizens are supposed to receive bonus or malus points through good behavior and conformity with the rulers, comparable to the hidden possibilities of the West's smart meters, smartwatches, smart speakers, etc. Unfortunately, the many insane and insensitive digitalists and other gadget fanatics make it all too easy for the powers behind, not only by carelessly and mindlessly spreading their also intimate data around the world, but also by immediately brainlessly pouncing on anything touted as awesome and casual by their worshipped gods. In any case, however, the goal of scientists working on artificial intelligence is to create an artificial brain that can also think for itself and is not limited to the automatable intelligence of human beings. According to Prophecies and Predictions, Billy Edward Albert Meier, Wasser Manzeit Verlag, FIGU, this too will become reality one fine day, although it will not yet be today or tomorrow. Contact 251 from the 3rd of February, 1995.
In this episode, of course, it cannot fail that new human life forms will be discovered. Extraterrestrials from whom the Earth humans will learn a great deal and unimagined things, and which are immensely more intelligent than the human beings of Earth itself. This, in turn, will lead to rapid development in all fields, whereby biological intelligences in artificial form will be created, which will be used for the control and handling of all apparatus, devices, electronics and machines, as well as flying and driving machines, etc., in a form in which it need not be feared that the biological intelligences will become independent and pose a danger to the Earth humans, as will be the case with the robot humans, who as a result will no longer be needed and will therefore be exterminated.
When reading the articles, it is noticeable that the authors, all highly educated, eloquent men, seems to be a male domain, consistently refer to the spirit, although it is often not quite clear what they mean by this. Edward Kaiser, for example, writes, "Algorithms are problem-solving procedures that can be broken down to small, mindless steps." What is a mindless step? Is it without life? Does it have no consciousness? Or is the mindless step comparable to Wolfram Klingler's sterile bits and bytes when he writes at the end of his article, "Everything that does not fit into the brave new world of machines must be made to fit on the Procrustean bed of the digitalists, the world of zeros and ones, in order to finally be able to control everything alive in the form of dead and sterile bits and bytes?" The scientists of today obviously still have no idea what consciousness is and what merely coarse material brain is, and certainly not what function the mind effectively has, as Billy Edward Albert Meier explains everything in detail through the Teaching of Truth, Teaching of the Mind, Teaching of Life, See, for example, free A6 pamphlets. For example, free A6 booklet Spirit, what is meant by this term, where it comes from, and what it means in the literal sense, etc., Billy Edgeworth Albert Meier, as well as subtlety of sensations, telepathy, levitation, and teleportation, etc. But if one wanted to compare a computer with a human brain, then the spirit of the computer would be the power supply, because the spirit animates the consciousness and thus the whole body, just as the power supply first brings to life or makes the computer run. The spirit also does not think and does not become ill, etc., for such things are reserved for material consciousness alone. Billy Edgeworth Albert Meier explains spirit briefly as follows. The spirit, and thus the spirit energy, corresponds to a materially physically impossible, ascertainable, or measurable, and verifiable highly subtle energy, by which everything and anything is animated impulsively. Consequently, nothing exists in the entire universe that would exist without the animating spirit energy. Unfortunately, the knowledge of their creative destiny of the evolution of consciousness was lost to the human beings thousands of years ago. This is the reason why they, in themselves ignorant and groundless, throw themselves believingly at the feet of everyone who suggests the blue of heaven to them with submissive allegiance. If we look at the events whose origin is to be found for the most part in the massively overpopulation of Earth humans, such as the total exploitation of nature, the terrible environmental catastrophes, the floods of refugees, the horrendous environmental pollution, the horrendous destruction and bestial wars, the degenerating terror, the xenophobia, racial and religious hatred, the gnawing hunger and tormenting thirst, the blatantly decreasing compassion among human beings, the unkindness, the unscrupulous greed for wealth, the emotional and psychopathic paranoid behavior, the consciousnesslessness and narrowness, the extreme brutality, the insane religious sectarian fanaticism, the heinous physical and psychological acts of violence, the indifference and lack of conscience and responsibility, and so on, etc., then one can truly say with Kant, the human being's intellect is underdeveloped, whereby underdeveloped is, of course, a gross understatement, and what could be more obvious than to supplement the human being with a few artificial components and thereby turn him into a supposed superhuman, a cyborg. Term from English, composed of the terms cybernetic and organism. In German cybernetics, the science of control, and organism. Lovers of the science fiction series Star Trek will surely remember the alien mite called Borg. All the above cries out directly for the answer to the question, what actually is a correct, truthful, and just human being? How does a true human being behave? See also Goblet of the Truth by Billy Edgeworth Albert Meier, free download at http://figu.org/ch, Section 28, sentences 93 to 95. A very simple, global answer to this question could be something like this. A true human being is one who lives according to the creational laws and recommendations and uses his consciousness in a creative way for personal evolution and also for the evolution of fellow human beings. In addition, a detailed answer by Billy Edgeworth Albert Meier to a reader's question, Contact 699 from 13.1. Toitian question, when can a human being be called righteous?
Answer, Billy Edgeworth Albert Meier. The answer comprises an old-fashioned 33 points, which, however, can be continued at will according to reason and reasonableness. A human being can be called righteous if he fulfills all his duties worthy as a human being, if he cultivates peace and also lives it, when he generously grants freedom to human beings in every way, if he rejects all evil, all wrong, all unjust and evil, all dishonesty, if he consciously avoids all harm against fellow human beings, the systems of nature, and the fauna and flora. if he loves and cultivates all that is good and positive, if he lives in true love, grows and always develops in this respect, if he leads his life in all-round righteousness, if he is free from personal evil, negative and harmful intentions and interests, if he is completely pure in conscience, if he cultivates charity, love for fellow human beings, and love for nature and its fauna and flora, if he cultivates a clear and clean conscience, if he is not addicted to material wealth, if he cultivates order and cleanliness in all things, if he lives in a good way according to the creational laws and precepts, if he uses his consciousness in a creative way for personal evolution, if he is honorable and dignified in his senses, aspirations and actions and lives these values in this way, if he avoids all destruction of nature and its fauna and flora, if he is helpful in every possible way to his fellow human beings, to nature and its fauna and flora, if he consciously cultivates virtues and also lives them out in every conceivable situation, if he uses the gifts and possibilities of his consciousness for personal and fellow human evolution, if he gives his language a clear, instructive, and understandable expression, when he gives honor and dignity to the ineffable beauty of the whole universal creation, when he pays tribute to the full value and grace of all creative treasures and their sublimity, when he consciously expresses his thanks for and cares for his life in a venerable manner, when he contemplatively and honorably appreciates all that is creative as the principal forces of all existence, when he recognizes the creation universe as such and brings all honor and dignity to it, if he is always helpful with regard to the well-being of human beings and all life forms, if, in spite of possessing many material goods, he does not exalt himself above his fellow men, full of intellect, reason, and logic, he judges and acts upon existing human rights and laws. Despite the power granted to him, he remains responsible, modest, decent, and upright. If he enlightens his consciousness with the light and teaching of the truth, spirit, and life, if he thinks and lives not according to a belief, but according to creative reality and its truth.
In this sense are hidden thousands and thousands of modes of conduct which, when fulfilled, elevate a human being to the status of a true human being. Now, how might an efficiency algorithm, that is to say an autopilot for constantly repeating the same or similar processes, make the corresponding human being a true human being? Does it increase his capacity for harmony, peace, love for his neighbor and fellow human beings, for fauna and flora? Does he thereby grant freedom to his fellow men and avoid all dishonesty and all harmful intentions and interests? Does he thereby become more righteous, more helpful, more responsible towards all that is creative? Not at all. The masterminds and financiers behind the often venal scientists have rarely cared about humanity. Every new invention is used primarily to destroy, and so it will be no different this time. The more neurological knowledge advances, the more dangerous it becomes for the ordinary citizens of a country. The lust for power and the miserable mindset of the ruling elites will make them dictatorial over the weal and woe of their people, leading to untold suffering. Centuries, if not millennia, will slip away into the past until the majority of human beings change their minds and a better time will come. But still, such a small micro-module that would help to increase the ability to concentrate and some other processes of consciousness would be quite nice and helpful. Conclusion: anyone who still has a vestige of intellect and reason should defend themselves against the appropriation and expropriation of their body and brain. Especially not should human beings voluntarily, for fun and because it is so cool, make themselves available as an automation and control factor, and allow their thoughts, feelings, and memory to be manipulated by evildoers.
By Marian Eulinger, Switzerland.
Contact Report 723.
For this technology, original and still unclear ideas, and thus the basic beginning for it, were already created in 1937. whereby then the development of a first fully electronic Digitus Universal computer took place early and quickly, which was then constructed 9 years ago, whereby the very first beginning did not start with this, because this actually leads fundamentally back into antiquity, whereby, however, the technology that has emerged from this until today will lead to immense progress and revolutionize everything that emerges from electronics. This will also result in developments that will lead to computing devices and appliances, etc., and will determine the direction of all further technical, electronic, and also progress into the future and towards Digitus technology. And this will take place especially from the beginning of the third millennium and will be used worldwide by young and old, and will lead in many cases to addiction as well as to increased criminality, violent crime, terrorism, family discord, indifference, and the destruction of relationships. However, this new technology will cause cancer in human beings and animals through long exposure to electromagnetic radiation, as well as disorders of consciousness and many other ailments. In its further development, this Digitus technology will also lead to the development of highly calculating apparatus and all kinds of devices, etc., as well as to data processing systems of many kinds, from the tiniest to the largest, as it will also find its way into television technology, as well as, of course, into many things with regard to medical and military and many other purposes. With this new technology, completely new ways of technical development will be opened up, which will then lead to the striving for an artificial intelligence or cognitive ability to act.
Contact Report 831.
You will not make any friends if you openly say it is approaching what in earlier times the rulers in their lust for power, violence and injustice exercised on the peoples, namely that they were exploited, tortured, and murdered in every conceivable manner. This has been preserved in later times and up to the present day, but in a different form, which has become more deceitful, vile, and detestable in this respect. Much is happening today so infamously hidden that it is not known to the peoples, which is why the striving for more power of the state powers and all financial institutions has not only promoted their criminality, crime and corruption in such a wise that, in imitating them, everything similar has also taken hold in the populations, so that all this can no longer be changed. According to our investigations and findings, all this has taken on such degenerations in the last 150 years that a new form has arisen which has been spreading more and more for years, namely the electronic one, which has not proved itself in the long run with regard to the payment of purchasable goods, and finally, the payment for work. This was the experience of our ancestors, which is why the means of payment for all kinds of goods and wages for work were completely abolished by U.S. Pliaran some 52,000 years ago, since we turned to peace. This also had the consequence that all financial crime and crimes of the same kind immediately became a thing of the past and never appeared again. All production sites for any kind of goods became the common property of all peoples, while work was no longer paid for with wages, because no means of payment were necessary anymore, because everything desired and necessary for life could be acquired without them. In the course of time, as a result of more modern technology, working hours were also reduced, so that today only 2 working hours per day are required per person to do what has to be done. However, this is not possible through overpopulation, as is the case on Earth, because even the most modern technology cannot achieve this, but only a moderate total population of less than 1 billion, which is therefore adapted to the planet. Our era is about the same size as the Earth, so our world population is correctly only 530 million, which would also correspond to the Earth's humanity, which is also what the Earth's population should strive for. The massive overpopulation that prevails on the Earth, however, brings with it, as a consequence of far too rapid technological development, all the degenerations that have already arisen and are still arising as a result of the ill-considered and far too rapid development of technology, about which Earth humans give no real thought. They simply allow themselves to be irresponsibly and thoughtlessly driven by the mania for technological development, whereby they drift more and more away from logic, understanding, and reason, as well as from reality. Through the unreasonably fast technological development, which is obviously uncontrollable by Earth humans, they bring forth a very rapid technological development of artificial intelligence, which is simply an attempt to be able to manage human thinking, working, and acting, etc. electronically. This also applies to computer technology, to which all and anything is to be transferred, and thus also to give it artificial intelligence. This, however, is highly dangerous in all respects, because instead of everything being programmed into the artificial intelligence for each individual step and purpose in a logical and very careful and deliberate manner, the artificial intelligence is inadequately programmed for safety so that it can ultimately take on a life of its own. This means that the artificial intelligence can then find answers and solve problems on its own, without the human beings being able to do anything about it. As a consequence, it might also automatically take over the leadership in the matter for which it is programmed, if it does not already do so independently, in order to ultimately determine, program, and execute everything and anything itself, without the human being able to do anything about it. In this manner, Earth humans are on the way to one day being dominated, enslaved, and harassed by artificial intelligence, as had also happened to our distant ancestors, who were only able to become free of everything again by abruptly destroying all artificial intelligences before they realized that they had been destroyed. This had to be done by a secretly organized agreement. Otherwise, it would not have been possible to free oneself from the artificial intelligence. Such a procedure, however, should not be possible on the Earth due to the catastrophic overpopulation and the division of many states, because a unity of the state powers will not be possible if it should come to that. The state powers and financial institutions will dominate the peoples in such a manner, as Father wrote in his annals, that a recommended uncontrollable and irresponsible development will come from them, which is due to the emergence and effect of the much too rapid development of technology, as it is also due to a very negative change in the brains of the majority of Earth humans, namely the brain organ which is also known as the prefrontal cortex by Earth experts, but which will be very strongly and permanently affected. This is the true conscious as well as self-responsible thinking in the majority of Earth humans, which has degenerated in the last 250 years to such an extent that logic, understanding, and reason have been replaced by abnormality. The consequence of this was that sensing and striving changed and became oriented towards the fact that, as in earlier times, belief in the imaginary could again spread generally among the mass of the majority of the Earth's humanity. This opened the way to new delusions, to new imaginings, to a new delusion of God, to a delusion of wealth, to a delusion of being important and known, to a delusion of watching sport, to a delusion of discordant sounds and singing, etc. Self-promotion, becoming known and important and presenting oneself in the coming television also takes place. As Father's annals say, through the fact that fame addiction increases in forms that no longer know any limits and is striven for through violence and murder, as well as dangerousness and degeneracy in every way. The only important thing is to be publicly known everywhere, as well as to be financially rich in excess or against all order, decency, and morality. Otherwise, however, Yesterday I came across, while reading the annals, that I may mention more than before that with regard to those who are simply called foreigners by us, I may openly say that my father Sfath and you observed them already in early times. In this respect especially their ancestors on earth, how they have wrought and in some cases allowed themselves to be worshipped as gods. But they were of the same character as earth humans, good or evil, and thus beings who were friendly or unfriendly, helpful or exploitative, peaceful, aggressive, open, devious, and even warlike. All these deities, as Sfath, my father writes in his annals, were of various shapes and sizes, but human beings who...
Contact Report 836.
Maybe, but probably I will be accused of lying or at least fibbing. But it does not really matter, because the same kind of thing happens with contact with you. But I actually wanted to address something else earlier, namely artificial intelligence, as this madness is called, will unfortunately come in the future completely differently than those responsible for it imagine in their stupidity. But then, when they realize their mistake, then it will be too late. This, as well as with regard to the fact that the Earthlings cannot inhabit this planet forever, which they have already fundamentally destroyed to a large extent, as well as making a mess of the climate. Only then, if the Earthlings succeed in finding an exoplanet and getting to it, can the human beings of Earth survive, unless foreigners refuse to help them. But what I wanted to say, at the latest when the artificial intelligence is developed far enough, they will see it, what they have done with their delusion, when the artificial intelligence created by them knows perfectly how to handle weapons, and also develops independently rebelling, and this will result, as Sfath and I have seen, as also that the massive overpopulation will not become wiser, and will continue to expand selfishly and make everything even worse, so that life on Earth will become a real hell for very many Earthlings. The Earthling will no longer be the master of their own thoughts, as has already begun with the delusion of God. Consequently, the Earthling will only be ruled by an illusory thinking that only allows them to believe, but no longer to think, decide, and act for themselves. Now, because everything has become as I said, the Earthling, the human being, has long since forgotten what has been and, moreover, it has also never been written down what the past of the human beings of the Earth really was. Therefore he or she also does not know that actually the all-embracing being depends on swinging waves, as also on sounds resulting from them. The sun, as the authoritative celestial body of the system, orders the distance of planets away from it in its system area by means of swinging waves and sounds. Something that is obviously not yet known to the great science of astronomy, because at least I have never heard of it. But it is the case, as I learned from Sfath and was able to sense and hear through his apparatus, that every system satellite actually orbits around the sun with a very specific swinging wave, that is to say vibration. This swinging wave also corresponds to a very specific wavelength as well as an impulse, which in turn produces a special sound. I could perceive, that is to say, feel and hear all this through Sfath's equipment. And such swinging waves and sounds were also known and useful to the faraway travelers, who also used them in early times on Earth and produced monumental works with them. They were even able to move the heaviest things through the air with it, which I mentioned years ago when I mentioned something about the building of pyramids in Egypt. At that time I simply used the term telekinesis to explain it, because it is possible through the powers of thought, which it actually was, but in this respect it was used to handle everything in the manner that certain swinging waves were used in connection with sounds. So basically I said at that time what is really true, but I did not explain that it was not a matter of mental teleportation in the actual sense. In order to transport the heavy cuboid blocks for the building of the pyramids, but precisely through a teleportation that was based on swinging waves and sounds, in other words, in a natural manner. If natural energy and power were used at that time to lift and levitate, then it was done in a different manner than through the actual application of thought power. And this was actually used at that time, and even earlier for transport by those who had traveled far and wide. Also for the precise production of the huge cuboid blocks, which today could not be moved even with huge machines, and could not be produced so skillfully with all modern tools. That
Contact Report 840.
The Swiss were also beneficiaries of slavery in America. And there were people who became rich from it, and then founded big companies in Switzerland, and had things built with which they created a monument for themselves with their blood money. It was also an idiotic Swiss person who caused hemp to be demonized as a drug in America, and then worldwide, which has since caused many deaths, not through the hemp product hashish, but because of the smuggling and the associated death penalty. Hemp from which bread was baked, as well as cords and ropes and fabrics, etc. were made, and which was also cultivated in large fields in my boyhood, where we played hide and seek. So Switzerland cannot exactly boast of being only good. Not even with its neutrality, which was broken because idiots and pseudo-Swiss in the federal parliament took over sanctions from the European dictatorship EU and applied them against Russia. And not to mention that other pseudo-Swiss are flirting with the EU and want to betray and sell out Switzerland to this dictatorship, as well as to NATO, not to mention that the entire Swiss people would then be bogged down. But not only the Swiss are in danger if they give up neutrality, which is in any case badly tarnished because of idiots in Bern, but it looks quite bad and nasty for the future for the whole of the Earth's population, namely with regard to artificial intelligence, because this will, as I have seen with Schwath.
Contact Report 841.
Then there is also AI, that is to say, artificial intelligence, which is getting out of hand and will take control of the humanity of the Earthlings in the future, whereby, that is to say, killer robots will do their evil work. This is because quantum technology will completely slip away from the Earthling and get out of control. Quantum technology is actually based on the fact that it can be used, for example, to explain the basic behavior of energy and matter in the atomic and subatomic range. Quantum technology is actually the basis of so-called modern physics, which is actually concerned with creation energy, but which is still erroneously called spirit. This is probably from a religious point of view, because the Earthling is a believer in religion. In the level of creation energy, that is to say the quantum level, as it can also be called, which for the time being is probably the last realization for physics, is actually the level of the original substance of matter. This level, which precedes matter, has no measurable particles for material technology, and likewise no waves, because it already reaches the area of the outer levels of creation energy, which can no longer be measured with gross material apparatus. This energy level is distributed in the entire space of creation, that is to say, in the entirety of all 7 universes, each of which has a different dimension and exists within one another. So we can speak of a quantum field that is in itself superluminously attuned to all forms of creation energy, thus permeating all 7 dimensions of the 7 universes in creation space. This field is actually egg-shaped. The creation with all its 7 dimensions, which are interwoven and independent of each other, is, roughly speaking, egg-shaped. The creation, I will explain, is a gigantic all-consciousness, which is not only single universal, but 7-fold universal and thus all-creative, once arising from the absolute absolutum, which developed via the primordial absolutum, then the creation absolutum, super absolutum, and further via the Sohar absolutum, then the being absolutum, and finally found its original origin in the nihilo, the absolute nothing. See Book Billy, primordial origin of all existence. Unfortunately, I cannot say much about all that is commonplace in earthly physics, because my knowledge of physical moments only relates to a general knowledge that I learned from Svath and at school. But the truth is, nevertheless, the whole of creation has nothing to do with the limited cosmos, which alone comprises only the fourth belt of the sevenfold belts of the universe, which again is only one part of the sevenfold creation, which in itself contains 7 universes, each of which exists in a different dimension within the other. The nihilo itself is the unrevealing, the formless, unfathomable, and unspeakable, and the essence of the primal ground of all existence, from which alone everything has emerged.
Contact Report 843.
The Earthling has oriented everything towards destruction instead of progress, and he believes that through the development and coming of artificial intelligence, everything will be better. But this will be the opposite. And this will happen in such a way that he, the Earthling, will bring himself to the brink of extinction, just as he is exterminating the wild creatures, of which about 150 genera or species are eliminated daily, that is, about 55,000 per year. But the idiotic protesters do not see and recognize this, because they do not realize that it is they themselves who are causing all the pollution and destruction to continue and to increase inexorably. Because it is they, these protesters, who are doing everything to make it worse and worse. This is because it is they themselves, these very demonstrators, who are producing and bringing into the world offspring, who in turn need all the means of life, which have to be produced again in this and that way, so that the entire ecosystems of the Earth are burdened and destroyed even more and more. This is one reason why pollution, CO2 production, air pollution, plastic pollution in nature and in the waters, waste pollution of every kind and every other devastating evil of pollution and destruction continues irresponsibly. But pollution, the destruction of nature and all ecosystems, flora, and also the extermination of wild animals, wildlife and otherwise all wildlife, is not solely based on the aforementioned monstrosity of air and environmental pollution and all destruction as perpetrated by the idiotic, irresponsible and stupidly impudent protesters, as well as alleged environmentalists themselves. They do this by producing and giving birth to more and more offspring, which in turn need everything that has to be produced and generated in order to live and exist, which promotes even more and ever faster environmental pollution, destroys the atmosphere, drives the extinction of all wildlife, poisons the waters, and builds up the fertile and precious land with roads, sports fields, airfields, railways, factories, cinemas and opera houses, with houses of worship and temples, as well as with factories, residential buildings, administrative buildings and apartment blocks, etc. built up. But they are unable to grasp with their sick skulls that this is forced upon them by the irrational creation of offspring by human beings, and above all by the non-thinking, stupid and impudent demonstrators who also cause destruction and often serious damage, and that it is even necessary due to their imbecility of non-thinking and non-understanding. With their stupidity and audacity, these lying, deceitful, stubborn, destructive, hypocritical show demonstrators are at the forefront of all irrationality, lack of understanding and illogic, because in reality they are doing the exact opposite of what they are supposedly denouncing. They do this by producing and giving birth to offspring and more offspring, which by their very existence increase environmental pollution even more, just as their existence also contributes in every respect to all other evils destroying the world, that is to say the planet, and thus all ecosystems, the whole of nature with all its fauna and flora. And when the atmosphere also collapses and the climate finally collapses, then Mathai is at the last, because then hardly anything can be saved from ruin. Yes, I have that here too, and it should really give Earthlings food for thought, because so-called artificial intelligence is already more advanced than the public knows. But it is being concealed by the scientists as well as by the politicians and the rulers themselves, who truthfully do not themselves know the full extent of what really secretly already exists. They are not aware of the full extent of what electronic development and nano development have already brought about, and the danger this poses. Especially not what the whole of artificial intelligence will bring to humanity in the future, which will unfortunately be more than just extremely unpleasant. But here is what I was talking about.
Tomorrow, the new EU General Data Protection Regulation comes into force. Will it possibly be undermined by smart systems? What we are about to show you highlights some of the risks in the use of algorithms. The film is fiction, but real in that it actually reflects the dreams of important financiers from Silicon Valley and researchers worldwide. Technically, much is feasible, but not yet everything you see in this film. Professor Stuart Russell from Berkeley and his team have kindly given us the broadcast rights for the film. Russell is a pioneer of artificial intelligence research, wrote the standard American textbook on the subject, and is one of the signatories of the open letter for a ban on autonomous weapons. The pilots, our customers, carried out almost 3,000 precision attacks last year. We are really proud of that. Our new system is even better at distinguishing the bad guys from the good guys. This is a huge step forward, something much better. Your children have something like that, don't they? Not really. A real son of a gun, that pilot? No. That skill is solely artificial intelligence. The drone flies by itself. The processor reacts 100 times faster than human beings. The randomized movement helps against snipers. Like every mobile device today, it has cameras and sensors. And just like their mobile phones and social media apps, it has facial recognition. There's a charge of 3 grams of explosives in here. It works like this. Did you see that? That little bang is enough to pierce a skull and destroy what's inside. As a squadron, you can penetrate buildings, cars, trains. You can dodge human beings and projectiles. They can avoid any counterattack. You can't stop them. You can get this for $25 million. It's enough to kill half a city. The evil half. A nuclear attack is unnecessary. Take out your enemy completely without risk. All you have to do is describe him. Let go of the swarm and sit back. Normal weapons just drop on a target. Smart weapons use data. If you can locate your enemy using data, even if it's with a hashtag, then you can hit evil right where it starts. This film is not speculation. It shows the results of the integration and miniaturization of today's technologies. I'm Stuart Russell, a professor of computer science at Berkeley. I have been working on artificial intelligence for 35 years. Its benefits can be enormous, also in defense. But if we allow machines to kill human beings, it will be devastating to our freedom and security. Thousands of my colleagues agree. It's in our hands to prevent that. But we do not have much time left.
Contact Report 846.
Truly. The world is perishing more and more through overpopulation and its destructive machinations, just as the human beings are becoming more and more degenerate and inhuman, and more stupid as well. And now artificial intelligence is being added to the mix, which will only trigger a great evil, because people are not thinking into the future, and consequently do not recognize what is coming.
Contact Report 849.
Well then, no. So therefore an intermediate question or intermediate matter. What do you think about the machinations of the governments, which in terms of all reason are misplaced and completely insane, and obviously as a result of the demonstrations of the environmentalists, are now going crazy and want to remodel everything in terms of means of transport, heating, and electricity, etc. Accordingly, they are making insane and confused decisions, and ordering measures that will do more harm than good, especially here in Europe.
Sheer ignorance. because this will not end the problem of the all-round rampant destruction of the planet, of all ecosystems, of all nature and its fauna and flora, as well as of the atmosphere. Only a radical reduction of the horrendous mass of Earth humans, worldwide without ifs and buts, and below 1 billion human beings, can bring an end to all destruction and a future. This would have to be the important strict resolution and implementation order by all leaders of all states. For this measure alone is only future-proof for the continued existence of the humanity of this world. And only through this can also the threatening disaster be averted and ended, which is in the offing through artificial intelligence, which is already much further advanced in its development than the peoples of Earth are informed about and are in danger of becoming in the future.
Overstrain is indeed not uncommon, and is therefore not an individual fate, because the longer, the more human beings fall prey to the delusion that they cannot hold out and be soft. Every 26th human being even plays sick or simply freaks out in order to no longer have to fulfill expectations as valuable human beings. In other words, that a large part of humanity is overtaxed to live up to life and society as well as their health in every respect and in all the important demands. Overpopulation unfortunately means that everything and anything starts to go wrong faster and faster, including the emerging and in the future disastrous artificial intelligence. There would be a lot more to say about this, but a final point must be made somewhere, because there is still something else to be explained about cholerics. Namely, if the human being learns the characteristics and traits that are peculiar to a choleric human being, then they can adjust to them accordingly and deal with them in the correct manner. Above all, it is important to ensure that the choleric human being is not put under pressure and is given his or her freedom, as well as not being specially controlled, because independence is highly valued in choleric people. Nevertheless, it is necessary to show a choleric human being that one has one's own limits, which he or she also has to respect and keep. Just as it is also necessary not to shy away from a confrontation with the choleric person, but to be strictly careful not to appropriate the process of his or her behavior for oneself. A choleric human being likes to receive recognition for his or her achievements, which is why it should be granted to him or her, just as it should also be granted to every other and non-choleric human being. Furthermore, it is appropriate to trust and give responsibility to the choleric person as well, for he or she can be consistently task-oriented and responsible and a good leader. The choleric person can also have very good skills that can be trusted. It is appropriate in any case to give the choleric human being some understanding, especially when he or she is at 100 and somehow helpless and even powerless against it in their irascibility and rage, because deep in their memory, something is going on which they can neither elicit nor control. For this reason alone, it is necessary to offer them understanding and support to come down. In order to deal with a choleric human being in a correct wise, it is very helpful to calm the human being down, because calming down always has a positive effect. A choleric human being can also get help, because there is also the so-called mindfulness and commitment therapy, which may be suitable for some choleric people to learn how to deal better with their temper and fits of rage. Those affected learn to recognize, perceive, and consciously counteract their feelings that trigger anger and temper, and to learn self-control. However, therapy can only be really effective for cholerics of both sexes if there is a conscious desire to work on oneself effectively and to change one's personal behavior. Trying to force this on the choleric person through a third party is, on the one hand, very exhausting, and usually not successful. On the contrary, it is a reason for the choleric person to go berserk.
Contact Report 871.
That can certainly prevent damage, because when I think of all that I have learnt in the last few weeks regarding all sorts of things that have happened on this planet Earth, conjured up and carried out by Earth's humanity, then I can only say that it is all staggering. Whether it is past economic wars, religious wars, or simply wars of conquest, hate wars, political wars, etc., everything is truly terrifying. Also, other things that have nothing to do with traditional forms of war, but with the unreasonable and uncontrolled progress of technology, especially in the form of the recently emerging artificial intelligence, will bring great disaster to Earth's humanity in the future, as I have fathomed through a future vision. It is all
Contact Report 874.
I realize that. But how clearly my answer is received, and whether it is implemented and everything is a success, is not something that is within my might. But I have written an article here about artificial intelligence, which I also want to publish in the Wassermann and in the next Zeitzeichen. If you would, please, read it and judge it?
There is no question about that. Because, of course, I want to know your thoughts in matters of artificial intelligence, which is not harmless in any wise, and will not only bring trouble but also severe sorrow to Earth's humanity, as I have already read from the annals of my father Svath. You two have researched many things far into the future and...
Yes, but there is not much point in talking about it, and besides, you will only be labeled stupid and crazy if you say anything.
Unfortunately, you are saying something that actually is, but I want to read what you have written now.
If humanity does not detach itself from its illusory thinking of its very confused and generalized faith and become more sensible, like not seizing the opportunity that still exists to finally see, understand and correct everything according to its correctness, then it will not be able to avoid taking upon itself that which inexorably leads to misery and unhappiness, thus into the most serious crisis of its existence. This is because artificial intelligence technology will intervene in the history of humanity in such a manner, the beginning of which has already taken place, that in future it will influence the comprehension of logic as well as the senses of intellect and rationality in such a negative manner that human beings will unlearn all the values of life for themselves. They are already so criminally disregarding reality that they are atrophying in their faith-based illusory thinking and in their AI-controlled illusory thoughts and behavior, which will become much worse in the future than it already is at present as a result of being directed by constantly evolving technology. Artificial intelligence, which is already becoming rapid and dangerous for human beings, will dominate and subjugate them with such gestalt in the future that they will have to learn to fight for their selfhood, which they will not yet realize, but only when it is too late to free themselves from the rule of AI without a fight, when it is openly directed against them. In order to better categorize and understand this and its significance, it helps to take a look at the fact that humanity has developed far too quickly in terms of technology and artificial intelligence and has allowed itself to be taken in by it. As a result, human beings are already dominated by it and can no longer achieve anything without making use of it and calling on it for help in this or that respect. We old-timers and our parents, and of course also our ancestors, were still strongly connected to nature, and sometimes even integrated into it, so to speak, because we were still working in it or with it. We had earned our daily bread all those years through and with it, and the whole environment, which we often had to face fiercely, with hard labor. But we were content, and very few of us had any idea, as our ancestors also did not, that everything and all of life would change in the future to such an extent that practically everything old would be forgotten. This in the sense that, as a result of very rapid development, new things would be brought up to date and brought into line with the latest state of progress, as is happening today in our time and is appropriate, modern, new, novel, newfangled, and new-fashioned, and is described as contemporary, timely, and cutting edge. Well, we were gifted with many abilities, But then in the New Age, new talents were found in us through development, which brought forth new cognitive abilities and revolutionized us in a wise manner so that we could adapt to the new age. This, while the later generations moved on from the old and aspired to completely different ways of life and live in them today without even thinking about what we prepared for them in terms of all the necessities of life. Through our efforts, the Neolithic, that is to say, first emergence of the productive economy, was brought into being, which unfortunately contributed to overpopulation over the years, as this inevitably led to more and more life security as a result of the steady easing of life and advances in medicine, and consequently also to the desire for more offspring, and consequently also to the fulfillment of the desire to have children. Furthermore, our efforts also brought about coexistence, the modernization of agriculture, market gardening, and thus again nutrition, as well as the entire food industry, factories of all kinds, and thus the Industrial Revolution, as well as mechanization and standardization. This also led to the emergence of more and more sports for human beings, which quickly became commercialized, and many human beings became fanatically addicted to sports, which meant that real self-activity and self-development fell by the wayside. Inevitably, many exercise machines were invented to strengthen the body and muscles, etc., while at the same time the development of technology progressed and evolved to such an extent that human beings became dependent on it. However, this was followed in the same step by the digital revolution, which led to the development of television and, to date, the internet and devices for analyzing and controlling the nerves and sensory organs, as well as now also artificial intelligence, in short AI, which is already beginning to dominate human beings without them being aware of it. However, the first stages of AI were already being developed secretly in America in the mid-1980s and were secretly deployed in 1988. In addition, AI means that many human beings become unemployed, which also leads to an increase in crime, hostility and hatred among human beings, as well as to war, dissatisfaction, and a further increase in overpopulation and the total destruction and annihilation of otherwise already impaired natural areas. This will also be accompanied by the extinction of many genera and species of fauna and flora, far exceeding the current annual extinction of around 60,000 genera and species of animals, creatures, and other self-propelled life forms, as well as the plant world from the lowest mold to moss and grass to the mightiest trees. Humanity will be dominated by artificial intelligence and its new concept, breaking free of all natural boundaries, and overpopulation will begin to curse at itself for not containing itself and letting artificial intelligence rule. The personal physical performance of human beings will decline more and more and will be replaced by locomotion devices, just as everything and anything will also be driven by mechanical devices and machines. Human strength will no longer be in demand, and the increasingly scarce fields will be harvested by electronic types of AI, which will feed the overflowing overpopulation, at least as long as the AI can still be directed by human beings and does not yet become independent. This Earth's humanity, now numbering almost 10 billion people, is sliding into a future that will be directed and governed by AI to its great disadvantage, whereby human beings will no longer be able to speak of their own manual labor or also of self-actuated mental labor, or of their own muscular and nervous activity. When human beings used to work, and most of them could still read and write, in the end, everything will be reversed, just as it was before the advent of modern technology and, due to rapid and uncontrolled development, artificial intelligence will also emerge, which will inevitably take over. What has been evident for some years now is that hardly any human beings can do without a mobile phone or a handheld telephone, whereby important and generally irrelevant and pointless conversations or chatter are carried on and time is simply killed. If I now turn to the digital revolution, namely artificial intelligence, then it should be explained that this is mainly referring to the technical infrastructure of human cognitive abilities, which is still being replaced by computer technology and the use of countless devices, systems, and machines, etc. This saves a huge amount of time and effort. This greatly and extensively spares the human being's muscular strength with regard to a great deal of work, which, however, has the consequence that this atrophies more and more, whereby the sensory system and his or her brain are also increasingly affected in this respect. The part of his or her consciousness that he or she is able to control through the functions of his or her brain is also impaired. The life energy of the creation, which forms, animates, and operates the consciousness, is blocked by human beings' illusory thinking in such a manner that it can no longer be fully active in the development of the evolution of knowledge, but only partially. As a result, human beings atrophy in their self-control of their ability to evolve and become, so to speak, a soulless robot that is directed and controlled from the outside, trapped in the vicious circle of a worldly belief that artificial intelligence will make everything good for them. However, this will make human beings dependent on it and enslave them, because the qualities and therefore also the performance of AI will continue to increase and will one day become so high in terms of quantity and ultimately to such an extent that everything and anything that human beings used to do will be completely forgotten, just as they will no longer be able to do anything with their own senses, energy, and strength. He or she will then practically eclipse himself or herself and might become useless, just as the donkey was once replaced as a beast of burden by modern machines and lorries with 100 or 1,000 times greater carrying capacity. Human beings have long since become accustomed to the fact that they can be outperformed by a machine in every respect, that a machine can calculate much faster than they can, and also that a machine can already do many things better than the best of its peers. However, with artificial intelligence, it is no longer just a question of controlling everything by machine execution of pre-programmed commands, but much more. AI is specifically about the programming of learning and the categorization of what has been programmed, but also particularly about the conclusions drawn from this, with pattern recognition playing a very important role. Especially with regard to conclusions, AI will go far beyond what human beings thought in their low intelligence, namely that they were great and good at it, but have always failed miserably in this respect. For many years now, many small auxiliary functions have been creeping into human beings' everyday lives and the workings of their aspirations, opinions, and wills, leading to political consequences worldwide and to war, crime, criminality, murder and manslaughter, as well as to the bankruptcy and ruin of banks, companies, and corporations, but also to over-indebtedness and lumpiness on a private basis. This occurs when there is an unlimited inability to pay, and the situation is such that current bills can no longer be paid. Lying, fraud, and other dishonesty and embezzlement at banks, companies, corporations, businesses, and transactions of all kinds are carried out by individual persons. Entire groups or criminal organizations and financial fraud, theft, robbery, and destruction are committed. The same or similar things also happen in private life, with the causes being very diverse and more than ever a chain of problematic life events such as unemployment, quarrels, divorce, separation, murder and manslaughter, illness or other prolonged suffering, etc. However, all of the above is not enough explanation, because more than 35 years ago, In 1988, AI was already being used effectively to deceive the peoples in the world. Without the knowledge of the entire world population, governments and intelligence services, etc., that artificial intelligence already existed. Thus, as a result of the endless greed for money and might, the development of artificial intelligence, financed by a very specific shadow government, was secretly and absolutely concealed even from all the governments of the world, known secret services, and, of course, all peoples, already created at that time. This was then used, as has also happened on various occasions since then, to influence and falsify the election results in a nasty manner. This is done by a shadow government which, in pursuit of its goals, can hoist certain controllable personalities into the ranks of government as presidents or other valuable persons. Something that has since become common practice, especially in America, without the American people and the U.S. intelligence services knowing anything about it. Not even the rulers of the Democratic and Republican parties, who in recent cases have had their presidents elected through the use of AI, namely the autocratic and insane Trump, as well as the old rickety and senile man Biden, who polishes his nose more on the ground because he keeps stumbling, trying something like a lame run and falling flat on his face. Both persons who, due to their incompetence, do not belong in government offices either. But this is also the case elsewhere in other countries, where people who are incapable of governing are in government offices, such as in Switzerland, where those traitors to the country take over sanctions against other countries from the EU dictatorship in violation of neutrality and apply them against foreign countries, just as, sadly, other traitors to the country are also spying on joining the EU dictatorship and NATO and trampling Swiss neutrality with dirty feet into the deepest mire of disloyalty to Switzerland. Well, speech recognition and language translation, as well as facial recognition by photo cameras, voice recognition, and everything else for personal identification is also very advanced, and has meant that human beings as citizens have been increasingly monitored and controlled and have somehow become transparent and vitreous. But the now rapidly advancing and effectively highly developed artificial intelligence, which will become independent and highly self-developed, is setting itself up to take control of human beings. This will lead to everything getting out of hand in such a manner that everything AI does will turn human beings more and more into transparent citizens, which will soon be the case in full, and they will become slaves to the authorities in the long term. This is partly because the governments and their authorities will have them monitored and controlled by their security forces at every turn, and partly because any emerging dangers of a possible rebellion by the people can be nipped in the bud. However, humans have already become so unfree today that they are no longer allowed to decide for themselves what he or she may and may not do on their own land, because in this respect, governments and their authorities are already taking effective measures against the freedom and self-determination of human beings, so that they can no longer do or not do what they please with regard to their property, even though what they are supposed to do would be of absolutely good value and would be in order. However, those who think in terms of clauses, such as idiots of pseudo-minds in the form of certain civil servants who call themselves representatives of the law, representatives of order and the like, but who are not able to think for themselves, but can only do so in bondage and in slavery to the authorities, because on the one hand they are religious or secular believers, and on the other hand they are autocrats and absolute authorities, behave like brainless henchmen of the superiors, and think they are something like gods. Recognition apps for music identification or wine identification, etc. are also in vogue, indeed already exist, and are being pushed further by AI. It is always about recognizing patterns, categorizing and drawing conclusions. And what is inevitably coming has already begun and might make such a mess of human beings' freedom, is that they will be banned from owning cash. It is already the case that in many cases, human beings who have deposited their money in the bank are being refused cash from their own balances. This, as many things can also only be purchased against prepayment and by credit card or online. And it is planned, and effectively already being worked on, to further advance the enslavement of human beings in such a manner that they will be completely prohibited from owning cash, which will also force them under absolute control in this respect, and also enslave them in terms of their monetary freedom. The precursors of this are already underway, but this will again result in a new and dangerous form of criminal offense that will not be harmless, but will cost many human lives. And all this because the development is not foreseen by those who enthusiastically tolerate, cheer to the heavens, and even promote artificial intelligence and the widespread enslavement of human beings by governments and their authorities and by the banks, or simply let everything happen and run its course without caring about it and resisting it. In the future, there will no longer be any reliance on the healthy and clear human mind and all senses of the human being, because artificial intelligence will ensure that what has already been happening for several decades as a result of laziness, carelessness, dissoluteness, and disinterest, etc., will spread to such an extent that it will be completely hopeless to bring about any change. Common sense is being undermined by human beings themselves, because their unerring senses, which have guided them through life and into the future since time immemorial, and also their clear concepts of reality, the real world and its truth, are already on very shaky ground today and will disappear more and more in the future. This is proven by human beings born after 1968 who have strange lifestyles, also strive for government offices, display strange government ideas and legislation, etc., are greedy for wealth, strive for public self-expression on television, are addicted to sports fanaticism and travel fanaticism, but no longer learn anything, no professions, no real knowledge and nothing at all, so that they are no longer even able to read correctly. These human beings deceive their own senses because they no longer hear and look at the world in a real manner, but at a world of synthesization, apps, mobile phones, screens and terms in foreign languages, advertisements, and believable lies and deceptions. In addition, they have become complete deadbeats when it comes to the practice of work, as well as being stunted and dumbfounded by the media.